is doing and what they say it's doing. We're told on the IEEE beamforming document that this technology cooked your eyes like eggs in World War II. And you all need to understand, these are military weapons. These are assault frequencies. If you garner nothing more than that, that's what you need to know. It's microwave radiation warfare. This is what this is.
That actually reviewed the data and recommended that there be no smoking on airplanes. You may be shocked to hear that it was even a question for science at the time, but it was. And when I look at what we know now about mobile phone radiation, I see some very interesting similarities.
A growing number of prominent doctors and scientists are raising warning flags over radiation this morning, and your kids could be facing a greater risk of exposure.
I think the most important study is a study by the National Toxicology Program in a classic large carcinogenicity test, one of the largest ever performed, and for that matter, one of the most expensive. They found increased risk of the tumours which we believe radiofrequency radiation is causing in man. Particular tumours called schwannomas. In the rats, they were in the heart. In humans, they're often in the nerve, the ear nerve, the vestibular nerve.
Cell phone providers say they follow all safety guidelines put into place by the FCC. The current FCC safety standard was developed nearly 20 years ago.
The manufacturers actually tell people in the instruction manual, which I've never read, not to put the cell phone against your ear.
It does say exactly that. There's the BlackBerry, for example, warns to keep your phone at least 0.98 inches away from the body when transmitting. With an iPhone, for example, it's 5/8 of an inch.
At this point, the evidence has become sufficiently strong that cell phone radiation is a human carcinogen.
A major development from California's Department of Public Health. High use of cell phones may be linked to certain types of cancer and other health effects, including brain cancer and tumors, lower sperm counts, headaches, and effects on learning, memory, hearing, behavior, and sleep.
If it was a real problem, I would know. If it was a real problem, the government would protect us. How come I'm not hearing about this? They're all things I've heard when I give seminars. You know, I get up there and they say, oh yeah, if this was really a problem, they would have told us. I am they. I am a, legitimate scientist, and I am telling you.
There's a lot of confusion about what 5G is. The G stands for generation. So you started off with the first transmitter system.
Back in the 1980s.
In the 80s, yeah. So you had 1G, then you had 2G. And as the generations moved on, you started to see more complex signal systems, cleverer pieces of antenna designs, etc., etc. So the whole thing became more data, quicker downloads, etc., etc. However, 5G is something completely different.
Our atmosphere has become far more permeated with electric waves of widely diverse types. There's no doubt now that electric waves, electromagnetic forces, cause direct biological effects. There's thousands of peer-reviewed papers on this subject. There's no doubt about it. But what are these effects? How are they affecting us? What can we do about it? We're now at a stage where we're putting in what's called 5G, which is a special type of broadcast for high-density information transfers. And it turns out that this is the same frequency bands that are used in crowd dispersal weaponry.
5G, first and foremost, is densification. So it's significantly more transmitters at close proximity to a human, and it is also a sophisticated, illegal, unlawful transmitter. What I mean by that is it is a high gain dielectric lens antenna, and what that allows 5G transmitters to do is to 3D map its environment in your home. The 868 megahertz frequency is specific for battlefield interrogation systems, so sub-gigahertz. It allows the signal to travel through concrete brickwork with ease, and it can actually data gather. It is a target acquiring system. Phased array is basically radar off the battlefield. It is extremely good at identifying targets and being able to lock onto targets. And not only that, it can specifically target you as an individual. So any judge sitting on an interesting case, let's say, any lawyer, any barrister, anybody doing any work that is potentially controversial, your life could be at threat. So the antenna design that you currently have on top of these LED streetlights, masquerading as a control management system, it basically battlefield interrogation equipment. The first phased array unit was actually called Mammoth, used by the Germans during the Second World War to identify Allied aircraft. Obviously things have moved on significantly since then.
Well, I joined the Royal Navy in 1960, and I specialised in microwave warfare. Radar, obviously, which uses microwave, but they don't just teach you radar, they teach you all about microwaves and other uses. So I understood about microwave warfare and how it can damage people, how it can harm people. Microwaves then were used as weapons, as they are today. It is a perfect stealth weapon, and when governments don't like a group of people, for instance the ladies who protest at Greenham Common in England about the American missile base they camped, they were microwaved. We microwaved Catholics in Northern Ireland to make them sick. It goes on all over the world, and it's a weapon that you don't know you're being targeted, because the dose is very, very low, which is actually more dangerous than a high dose. It's very, very low, and it may take a year or two, but you can cause neurological damage and cancers with low-level microwaves, and you can make all your opponents sick. It's a perfect weapon for a government.
Our impulses are being redirected. We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. Their intention to rule rests with the annihilation of consciousness. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. Please understand, they are safe as long as they are not discovered. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
Almost immediately, I had neighbours knocking on the door, talking about children bleeding from the nose. I had images posted on Facebook. And one neighbour in particular came to my door and mentioned the fact that since the LED street lighting had been installed, she was bleeding from the nose every single night. I thought it was unbelievable. However, I spoke to another neighbour who lived not far from the first lady who mentioned this, and she also confirmed that since the LED street lighting had been installed, she also had started to develop nosebleeds and had never had nosebleeds before in her life. That then put me on a journey to investigate. I measured microwave radiation levels from the transmitters on top of the LED streetlights. The basic 868 megahertz, it was significantly higher than the current Council of Europe 1815 resolution, which is a maximum of 600 millivolts. I've measured up to over 3,000 millivolts.
5 to 6 times higher than the guidelines.
Significantly higher than the current Council of Europe 1815 resolution, which states that 200 millivolts should be the maximum. The Bioinitiative report states that it should be significantly less than that. So we've got the Council of Europe, that's, you know, the international criminal courts are stating that, you know, the learned judges have said that 200 millivolts, and I'm measuring in bedrooms in Gateshead, minimum 600 and up to 4,000.
Does this mean that in 2020, 2021, when 5G is destined to roll out globally, that you're going to get those kind of readings everywhere all the time?
Everywhere all the time.
Worse than that?
Worse than that.
Yes, 5G will connect the Internet of everything. If something can be connected, it will be connected in a 5G world. Hundreds of billions of microchips connected in products from pill bottles to plant waterers, requiring massive deployment of small cells. We won't wait for the standards. Now, to make this work, the 5G build-out is going to be very infrastructure intensive. We must reject the notion that the 5G future will be the sole provenance of urban areas. The 5G revolution will touch all corners, and that's damn important. The interconnected world of the future will be the result of decisions we must make today.
The main issue before us today is Senate Bill 637 and Senate Bill 894, the former by Senator Hugh and the latter by Senator Knopf. We're going to invite the first four witnesses in support of the legislation, and that would be John Jones with Sprint, David Lewis and Andy Emerson with AT&T, Neil Krevda with Verizon, and Frank Iacovetti Jr. with T-Mobile.
So be straight with me. Is it true?
It could be.
No, well, very few cases. There was an unfortunate incident out in Iowa. Look, gentlemen, practice these words in front of the mirror. Although we are constantly exploring the subject, currently there is no direct evidence that links cell phone usage to brain cancer.
I'm Sharon Goldberg. I'm an internal medicine physician. I've practiced medicine for 21 years, and my background is mostly academic, internal medicine, hospital-based, clinical research, and medical education.
I'm a certified Microsoft small business specialist. I worked on space station designing the cabling system for the airlock module, where I was responsible for EMI/EMC analysis, which is electromagnetic interference, electromagnetic compatibility.
I am a professor in the Department of Epidemiology, Biostatistics, and Occupational Health, and I teach there both toxicology and health effects of electromagnetic radiation.
My name is Daphne Tachover, and I'm the founder of an organization called We Are the Evidence. We are an organization that represents the many adults and unfortunately many children who have become very sick from wireless technology radiation.
There seems to be a couple false Easter eggs being put out there right now. I want to make sure we dispel that right off the gate.
The effects of wireless on health scientifically are very, very clear.
So it's always pushed back to the definition of an acceptable level of radiation. And that's what this is, by the way. This is about radiation.
Wireless radiation has biological effects, period.
My name is Dr. Angie Kolbeck. I've been reviewing the studies showing the impacts of wireless radiation on our health, and there are now thousands of studies showing the following adverse health impacts to wireless radiation: cancer, oxidative damage, DNA damage, DNA failure.
Things like memory, dizziness, anxiety, brain fog.
Headaches, nosebleeds, cognitive problem, exhaustion.
We have evidence of DNA damage, cardiomyopathy, which is the precursor of congestive heart failure.
Short and long-term memory loss, decreased attention spans, lower reaction times, even involuntary contractions of muscles causing misalignments of spines and jaws.
Breast cancer. We suddenly have breast cancer in women who have no DNA predisposition.
Disrupted immune function and change in stress proteins, reproductive and fertility effects.
There are dozens and dozens of studies that show beyond any doubt what this radiation is doing to our sperm. Now, if you take the cell phone out of your pocket, the sperm will recuperate within 3 to 4 months. What would not recuperate would be the damage to the DNA of the sperm. That is irreparable. The wife of the ex-governor of Indiana was diagnosed with glioblastoma. Same brain tumor Ted Kennedy had and John McCain had. Did you look at John McCain's scar? This is a cell phone brain tumor. LeBron James, one of our sports people, had a salivary gland tumor. That is another cell phone tumor. You didn't hear about it because immediately after that was discovered, he was paid by Samsung to become their spokesperson.
We are seeing increases in brain tumors. We're seeing increases in Alzheimer's. We're seeing increases in all of the neurotransmitter diseases, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, Parkinson's. These are all disease systems that are known to be associated with low-level energy exposures.
We talk about 24/7, around-the-clock exposure, wherever you are and your whole body. You never get away from it. And it seems from our studies that maybe your immune system can cope with for a time, but it will deteriorate. Then the irradiation will definitely damage cells at a deeper level, and the question is what will then happen?
These are out of peer-reviewed papers, so these are not just hypochondriacs thinking that they're doing it. We're having real problems with this.
This is no longer a subject for debate when you look at PubMed and the peer-reviewed literature. These effects are seen in all life forms: plants, animals, insects, microbes. So 5G is not a conversation about whether or not these biological effects exist. They clearly do.
There is scientifically evidence that is so strong that you can be certain that the standards used by the FCC to manage health effects are wrong.
We need to start measuring how much radiation are people being exposed to before we roll out 5G. There are 4 kinds of electromagnetic fields that we know are harmful to human health. So radio frequency radiation, magnetic fields, dirty electricity, and electric fields, okay? Our exposure, any given person, and all humans are affected by EMFs. What is our exposure in a day? It's not one cell phone. It's cell phones, it's multiple wireless networks, it's smart meters, it's cell towers. It's this sandwich, and it all adds up.
The data we're going to look at are all published science, testing results, or public standards. At the bottom end of the radiation scale of what's called power density, or signal strength, is the minimum level at which cell phones will work, which was found to be 0.2 billionths of a microwatt per centimeter squared. Pine needles were found to age prematurely at 0.000027. At short-term exposures of 0.05, children aged 8 to 17 experienced headache, irritation, concentration difficulties, and behavioral problems. 0.1 is the biobiology or building biology guideline for extreme concern. 1.0 produced sperm DNA fragmentation and a decrease in sperm viability in vitro. Also at 1.0, the science shows the following bodily effects can occur: headaches, dizziness, fatigue, insomnia, chest pain, difficulty breathing, and indigestion. 2.5 saw altered calcium metabolism in heart muscle cells. 4.0, changes in the hippocampus affecting brain memory and learning. And at 6.0, DNA damage in cells. So, where are smart meters on this list? Electrical Power Institute in December 2010 measured a single Itron smart meter with pulses up to 7.93 microwatts per centimeter squared. Our own testing indicated approximately 8.0 with 1 meter. These tests are at a close distance, approximately 1 foot away from the meter, but an infant's crib could be just as close on the other side of the wall where the meter or bank of meters are installed. Even though there are all these known health effects at levels far lower, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Luxembourg see fit to set the standard at 9.5. And China, Poland, and Russia, 10.0. This is the same level at which behavior has been altered, producing reflexes of avoidance following 30-minute exposures. A room of 12 smart meters, very common and even a conservative number in an apartment building, tested at 19.8 microwatts per centimeter squared. This is hundreds of times higher than levels which clearly indicate harmful effects. So, how can utilities and governments get away with forcing these devices on everyone? This is how. In Canada and the US and several other civilized countries, the safety limit is set at 600 to 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. This so-called safety limit is literally tens of thousands of times higher than levels which are known to damage health, according to peer-reviewed published science.
Faster, better, more reliable internet. That's the promise of 5G technology, but there is also the peril. Health hazards associated with radio frequency that is higher also and requires more transmitters and antennas. And the stark, simple fact is the health hazards are unknown and unstudied. And that is a sign of neglect and disregard on the part of the Federal Communications Commission that seems unacceptable. There have been no answers so far. The FCC basically has said everything's fine, but in order to reach a conclusion about the health and safety of this new technology, we need facts.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for having this hearing. 5G, as you well know, also uses higher frequency waves that don't travel as far and will rely on a network of hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of small cell sites. And the question then is, are there any health implications, any public safety implications to those additional sites that are likely to be located close to homes, schools, workplaces, and closer to the ground? Correct?
Correct, Senator. Yes.
So my question for you, particularly Mr. Gillen and Mr. Perry, how much money has the industry committed to supporting additional independent research? I stress independent research. Is that independent research ongoing? Has any been completed? Where can consumers look for it? And we're talking about research on the biological effects of this new technology.
Thank you, Senator. I think, thank you for your focus on the issue. Safety is paramount, and as you alluded to, we rely on the expert agencies, we rely on the findings of the FDA and others as to the requirements to keep all of us safe. There are no industry-backed studies, to my knowledge right now. Happy to visit with you as to what opportunities you think there needs to be more studies, and we're always for more science. We also rely on what the scientists tell us.
So essentially, the answer to my question, how much money? Zero.
I can certainly follow up with you, Senator. To my knowledge, there's no active studies being backed by industry today.
Anybody else know of industry commitments to back research, fund it, support it, to ascertain scientifically the health effect?
No, I'm not aware of any.
So there really is no research ongoing. We're kind of flying blind here, so far as health and safety is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're a trained medical professional.
Yes.
We don't have one on the panel. What are we to make with of the American Cancer Society, for example, telling us there's no evidence of harmful product?
Many of these organizations have conflicts of interest.
Very briefly, if you can, what do you mean by conflict of interest?
One of the first things that you teach residents is that you always have to look at the funding.
There's a tremendous amount of sponsored research by people who are hired to do studies to find no effect. And that's plagued this field in a number of countries.
The radio frequency radiation work that we did was supported by Motorola. The relationship was really very cordial and very stress-free, but only up until we started generating data. These folks were very, very upset and began to talk about how are they going to handle this, what sort of spin can we put on this, what can we expect from this, and from that point on the relationship changed. What we saw was that Motorola began to exert more and more control over the work, telling us what to do, telling us how to write abstracts, what to say in the abstracts, what to say in the papers, how to do the work. No, don't do this. Yes, do it this way. This was unacceptable. I had completed our study of DNA damage, and I submitted the final report to Motorola. They simply weren't willing to accept my interpretation of my study, my evaluation of my study, my knowledge of science at that point, and tried to urge me not to publish the study.
Did you hear about people coming to you as far as having complaints about illness?
We were made aware of health complaints following installation of smart meters, and we wanted to verify this using our field work. So I measured the field of about 30 different people while they stood 1 foot in front of the smart meter, and in every single case, the human energy field was obliterated as they stood in front of the smart meter.
They're effectively indemnified against adverse health impact lawsuits when the acceptable limits are higher than the limits actually shown to show harmful health effects.
The FCC guidelines were developed for short-term exposures, 6 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on it's a phone or an outdoor exposure. And they have absolutely no connection to the biological effects that have been very clearly summarized in the Bio Initiative.
So as you can see, there's a number of individuals in this room today that have serious concerns about this as regards to their health. If one of your companies decides to put one of these small cells up at a pole that's within, say, 50 feet of one of their houses, what recourse do they have to say, is there a way to move it somewhere else?
There's language in the bill so that the authority can require the applicant to come forth with certification of compliance with the FCC's rules related to radio frequency emission.
Remember that denial of request or denial of permit request that you can put in? It's going to point back to the acceptable levels as determined by the FCC. Not the EPA or not the CDC, the ones who usually take care of health concerns, but by the FCC, which is staffed by former members of the telecommunication industry. That's the fox guarding the henhouse.
It's a fact that most insurance companies will not indemnify against EMF effects. Telecom companies around the world are warning their investors of potential major costs due to real or alleged risks of EMF pollution from their products. Interestingly enough, they're warning their investors, but they're not telling their customers. They're basically keeping it quiet because that's where their money comes from. So we're using technology that could be very potentially harmful to us, and the investors know it. But their only worry is that they might lose money, not that our health might be affected.
First of all, I think what you should really think about is why is it that they're not insured? It's not that they chose to be self-insured. They actually rejected by the insurance company from being insured because they understand the risk.
So the insurance companies, the big insurance companies, will not insure the telecommunications?
So there's insurance companies, and then there's what's called secondary insurance companies. Secondary insurance companies are the insurance companies that insure the insurance companies. So in an event, an insurance company, let's say I insure Verizon, and it may not be able to meet the claims, then the secondary insurance company is kicking in.
Like Lloyd's of London?
Sorry?
Like
Yes,
Lloyd's of
exactly.
London?
So two leading one would be Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re. Both told the insurance company not to insure the wireless industry, and this is why they're not insured. And that should give you a hint. Now, this is exactly why they have to prevent a health lawsuit. And how did they prevent lawsuit? That goes back to Section 704. Section 704 was passed in 1996. This is how our rights in regards to health were taken away by the wireless industry. What this legislation did, it gave the power to regulate the health effects of wireless technology to the FCC. FCC is a spectrum auctioning agency. It's not a health agency. They don't even have one biomedical person on their team. And then the other thing that Section 704 did, it actually took the power from the states to regulate location of cell towers based on health. And what does it mean? It means that if they want to put a cell tower in front of your home, you cannot go to your city council and say, hey, stop, I don't want it. I just heard in a lecture that there are 10,000 studies proving that it's harmful. I don't want it. My child is sick. They would tell you, stop. You're not allowed to mention this in the city council because Section 704 says that if you will, and if the application will be rejected, the city will be sued, can be sued by the wireless industry.
A major U.S. government study on rats finds a link between cell phones and cancer.
Very first government study linking the radiation from cell phones to cancer.
Two-decade, $30 million federal study out today found there is some evidence of a link between cell phone radiation and brain cancer.
Professor, what is the NDP? I've heard that study several times. NDP is what?
So it's a $25 million study on rats and mice that was supposed to demonstrate that there were no effects of radiation below thermal. And in fact, it demonstrated exactly the opposite. And it follows on the heels of two major studies on animals that said exactly the same thing.
And that study was designed perfectly to make sure that it cannot be challenged, that there will not be any doubt. That's why it took them 14 years. That's how they prevented discussion of health. And why do they want to prevent discussion of health if there's no problem with health?
Simply put, FCC is completely unprepared, unable, and possibly unwilling to oversee 5G for safety, even as it barrels toward us.
How much effort was put forward to address this? What most of these people or many of these people are here for, which are the health concerns. Was there any dialogue back and forth? Was there any working? Was there many studies evaluated to look at regarding this area?
Maybe not every person that has concerns on the legislation was brought to the table.
Okay, so from your perspective, you feel that there was a legitimate amount of time to evaluate the data that the opposition would have on this?
Absolutely, and I wouldn't put forth something that I didn't believe in. And I'll tell you, as I mentioned earlier, and it's been commented several times amongst the panel here, this is truly an economic development issue. Our 3-year-old, again at home, is outraged when we pull out the driveway and he's not able to access Wi-Fi.
I think anyone who puts Wi-Fi into a school should be locked up for the rest of their life. I really do. I think they're not fit to walk on the surface of this planet because they haven't looked at the research, and whatever incentive they have, it is not worth the genetic problems that parents are going to face with their children when they're born.
France has banned Wi-Fi in nursery schools and put warnings out for regular schools because they're finding there's impaired learning capacity in children when they're around Wi-Fi. And they have to put up warning signs where they put Wi-Fi transmitters.
When I got sick and I learned that they're putting Wi-Fi in the schools in Israel, I was very sick at the time, but I could not tolerate the thought that children in the schools will become as sick as I have. And after a few months of correspondence, I submitted a Supreme Court case in Israel to ban the use of Wi-Fi in the schools and replace them with wired network. The 4 top diseases that kill our children, our young adults right now, are brain tumors, thyroid cancer, testis cancer, rectal cancer, everywhere we put our cell phones. And a lot of our children are sick and they're being misdiagnosed and mistreated because the wireless industry has put billions and billions of dollars in the past 30 years to mislead the public as to the health effects and keep the public uninformed.
We are performing an experiment on children. We are exposing children to microwave radiation for 6 hours during every school day. We have had absolutely no studies looking at the long-term effects of this radiation on young people or even on adults.
A considerable amount of research shows that developing brains and bodies of children are much more affected than adults. And there are clear indications of a link between increased electromagnetic fields and autism spectrum disorders.
We took 10 autistic children and went back to the sleeping location where the mother was when she was pregnant with that child and compared it with the sleeping location of a mother that gave birth to healthy children. We had 10 mothers in that group, 10 mothers in this group, and in the group of the autistic children, we found that the measurements that we got for the microwave exposure was elevated compared to the group of children that were normal. The fetus is affected. The exposure to man-made electromagnetic fields has become the first factor that could be isolated ever in autism that could predict autism.
The fifth generation of wireless technology, or 5G as it's being rolled out worldwide without safety testing. Let me say that again, without safety testing. And how we've got scientists and doctors and environmental organizers saying, stop this. Because in terms of the effects of wireless radiation, the science is in. Wireless radiation can lead to cancerous heart tumors, brain tumors, DNA damage. Wireless radiation is linked to infertility, to autism, Alzheimer's, and more. And guess what? All the effects that I just listed, those are some of the effects that are known according to the technology that's being seen today.
First of all, you have to know that we know that the other EMFs that we're exposed to are already known to be health risks. And basically that 5G, because of the frequency that's going to be used and because of the extraordinarily high pulsation levels that will be used, is a much bigger threat to our health than the things that we already have, which are very substantial threats to our health. We're not just talking about the intensity. We're talking about the frequency and the very high level of pulsations. There's a huge literature which shows that pulsed EMFs, EMFs that pulse up and down very rapidly, are in most cases much more biologically active than our non-pulsed EMFs. Every single wireless communication device communicates via pulsations, but the industry completely ignores this issue. The problem with 5G is that they're planning to put out tens of millions of these antennae all over the place without doing one single biological safety test.
Are you implying possibly that we, the consumers, are the guinea pigs since they haven't really done tests to see the effects in a smaller setting?
I mean, that's not an implication, it's a statement. We are, yes.
Cancer is not the main concern that I have. I'm really concerned about sperm count and about effects on pregnancy.
How many of you know that 1 in 6 American couples is unable to have a child when they want to? How many of you know that last year the birth rate in this country dropped the most that it ever has in recent history, 3% in a single year?
People look at the sperm in people use cell phones, and the sperm, usually sperm swim and they swim straight. But if you expose them to radio frequency, mobile phone waves, they swim in a circle.
Studies have been done here in Australia, taking sperm from healthy men. And one test tube gets exposed to cell phone radiation, and one test tube is not exposed to mobile phone radiation. And then the results are evaluated. And this is a measure of vitality. We measure how well the sperm swim. This is a measure of motility. This is a measure of mitochondrial DNA damage. They have 3 times as much damage on their DNA if they have been exposed to mobile phone radiation. The data on that are rock solid. Cell phones can damage sperm quantity and quality.
Your embryo, your uterus in the fetus, where your child is developing for the first 100 days, in the ovaries, the eggs do not have that protection, so they are at maximum risk from radiation. And for the first month or so, you wouldn't even know you were pregnant. You wouldn't even be taking precautions. That is the main danger area. So you give birth to a daughter, but her ovaries are now contaminated. She may be normal, she may be genetically damaged, but her ovaries are at the most risk. So when your daughter grows up and she becomes pregnant and has a baby, this is where one of these eggs will be fertilized and come out. So the real damage here is your grandchildren. That is where it is going to show most.
One interesting case, John Patterson. He was a telecommunications engineer in Sydney, Australia. Very brilliant man.
For 20 years, John tested Telstra digital systems. Over the time, he realised the dangers of electromagnetic radiation.
It disrupts the bioelectric system of your body, which is really your brain, your nervous system, how your muscles talk.
And he tried warning of these effects through different agencies, through his company.
Got all the test gear out and measured it and drew up a report, and I was immediately removed from service.
Finally, in 2007, he took matters into his own hand. He commandeered a used British Army tank and went and destroyed 6 cell phone towers in Sydney, Australia, because he wanted to stop this. He was trying to make a point.
The message was that how dangerous it was.
You know, these people were elected by us to manage our infrastructure in a responsible manner. That is the sole purpose of government if it's going to exist at all. And if it doesn't do that, then it has no right. It is invalid. So we need to pull this infrastructure down. We really do. But in order to do that, I mean, we can't just be some violent domestic terrorist. You've got to bring this awareness to the people that these towers are doing them damage. You don't need bandwidth that fast. And they're not doing it so you can download movies quickly. They're doing it so they can track every single thing you do and bring in this social crediting system to control even everything you think.
Welcome everybody to the White House. This is White House 5G Summit. My name is Justin Clark. I'm the Director of Public Liaison, and we are thrilled to have you here today. Really happy to be joined by a lot of leaders in industry, members of Congress and the Senate, White House leaders on this, and people from the FCC. Before we start, one, we are government. So don't assume we know anything, okay?
I do agree, I don't know anything.
I have become accustomed to giving speeches in my new position on subjects about which I frankly know very little, and we need more cell towers and connections.
This is a mandate. This is being pushed down your throat by a company that is not responsive, by a government that is not responsible, and it's being done in a collusion that's designed to undermine the individual rights of individual people in communities across the country and around the world.
The Minister for the Environment has a duty. His duty is primarily to ensure that there is cleaner, better, healthier environment for people in this country. It's a simple duty. He also has a responsibility in regard to science and innovation to make sure that that happens. What seems to be happening here, in fact one could say undoubtedly happening here, is he's using science and innovation to ensure that our right to life is threatened. There have been no public debates. There is no public discourse. There are no public disclosures as to why, when, how, what is going on in regard to 5G. That by itself is a breach of ministerial responsibility, and one which we really should look at in terms of a private prosecution against the ministers who have failed to protect our right to life.
I've met with molecular and cellular biologists, with blood microscopists, with weapons development experts, frontline activists and researchers, and all the stories I'm hearing from these experts and pundits leads to the same thing. 5G is almost certainly the end game. It is such a perilous threat that it is almost impossible to imagine, let alone describe. When the 5G signature goes live, it will tap into a multitude of satellites which are in geosat orbit around the surface of the Earth. Millions of surface antennas will pick up that signaling and will then scatter the signaling into hundreds and hundreds of millions of different micro antenna systems set up on street lamps and even in your home, which you're not aware of incidentally. The LED light bulbs in your home invariably contain the micro or nanotech lens flare capacitors which will receive the 5G signaling, and it will proliferate the 5G signaling everywhere by exploding the signal into billions of photons which will target everything all at the same time. This is stealth technology. This is invisible science. But what it means in simple terms is that you will be flagged up, visible, trackable inside your own home. Anywhere you move on the surface of the Earth, they will have a lock and load tracking capability over you. You will be visible to invisible masters, each one of us, all the time. Today, our governments and the corporate sector have managed somehow to infiltrate the mainframe of our civilization and are pushing through a $20 trillion infrastructural rollout without any, and I mean without any, health science running behind it. There have been no tests. Your government and your health authorities are either in collusion on this matter of genocide and ecocide, or they're just damned stupid, and I would suggest it is the latter.